Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Justin Napaco at Part 3, and I'm going to be discussing the Harlem Renaissance. For us all to understand what the Harlem Renaissance is, I'm going to be starting with the history. How did the Harlem Renaissance come to be? Back in the American Civil War, during the late 17th century, life wasn't easy for the average black person. Despite slavery being a dying institution at the time, it was still quite prominent in the United States. So, in this slide, it discusses about the late 17th century. And as you know, black people back then, I'm sure everybody knows how black people have been persecuted and enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. Black slavery was originally started by the Europeans, and as you know, Europeans also were an import and export. So at one time they decided to export black slaves into U.S. soil. Apparently, Americans found black slaves quite useful, and cheap, and time efficient. Hence the 400 years of black slavery in the United States, which takes us to the American Civil War. The American Civil War was a war between two parties. It was between the Confederates and the Union. So basically the Confederates were led by the southern part of America, which they fought for slavery, which they fought for black slavery. They wanted to keep slaves. They didn't want it to end. They didn't care about these people's souls. They didn't care about these people's well-being. They just wanted slaves, and the only reason was because it helps them farm. It helps them in their tasks. It helps them it held them as servants. The Union Army, which was led by Abraham Lincoln, fought for freedom of slavery, as the name suggests, unity. So hence the Civil War. The African American slaves were desperate for a change, which was why 179,000 black men, 10% of the Union Army, decided to fight for the Union Army in hopes for getting the whites' respect. So, yes, black Americans heard about the Civil War, and they decided to join in. They wanted freedom. Of course, the Union Army fought for freedom, which they would also like for themselves. So, what did they do? They fight for the Union Army. They fight for the Union Army in hopes of getting their respect, in hopes of getting a place in society, in U.S. American society, and hopefully get their freedom. And if not freedom, then maybe something less painful, less persecuting than black slavery. Unfortunately, the 179,000 men weren't enough. They were still mistreated like pests. They were paid less than their white counterparts, and none of them would become prisoners of war. They were killed whether they surrendered or not. So, this act of heroism was still not enough to get them paid as equally as their white counterparts. So the Union Army was made up of black and white people. So what I mean in here is that the white people, let's say for example, in a month, weekly, a white person was paid $10, which was still pretty big at the time. But a black person would only be paid, let's say, less than that. Let's say $7 or $5, maybe even $3. So there was the inequality. But through this, even though there was inequality in pay, since they were fighting in the same army, the black and whites, they were fighting in the same army, some of them started to, of course, build friendships with each other. Some of them knew each other's past and presence, and they developed some sort of a bond. So this one was a small work in progress. And there's also this rule in war. As you know, war is just like a sport, but unlike any other sports, people actually, there's little to no rules concerning safety. One of the rules that you might be familiar with is the white flag. So, as you know, the white flag, if somebody raises a white flag, it means surrender. And the other party is obliged to respect that, to respect the white flag. Okay, they surrender, they have no more weapons, they don't want to fight, they put their weapons down and then they surrender, they want to be prisoners, right? So take them in as prisoners. Okay? The black people, their white flag was not respected. Their surrender was not respected, right? Because the Confederates, they didn't care about black people, right? Remember, these were the people that wanted to keep them as slaves. So, whenever a Confederate would see a black person raising a white flag, or a black person, a black soldier putting his hands up, dropping his weapons and saying, I yield, I surrender, they would not care. They would not have any remorse for these black people, and they would kill them. Not only kill them, they would also take them home, and then they would torture them and beat them up like little dogs and all those things. Basically, the point I'm trying to exploit here is that the Confederates did not care about the black people's well-being. But so yeah, that was a civil war. That was what it was to be a black person during the American Civil War. Moving on to part 2, the Great Migration. So this was already after the Civil War. By the way, the Confederates lost and the Union Army won. Even after the American Civil War, the African Americans still felt unsafe and unwelcome in the South, despite their contribution to the Union's victory. A huge number of blacks found greener pastures in the North, Harlem, New York City to be exact. Hence, the Great Migration from 1916 to 1970, when around 6 million of African Americans decided to leave the South and make themselves at home in the North. So, the Union Army already won, and usually people would expect peace after the war. Still, even after the war, even after the Union, of course, they lived in the Confederates' land, the South. They lived in the South where it was mostly Confederates. Alright, so the African Americans decided to take their families to the North. It was called the Great Migration because it was in mass. It was not just 1 or 10 families. It was 6 million African Americans in the time span of 1960 to 1970. Actually, Harlem was supposedly what originally was a place for white people, for middle class white people, like men and women. And of course, these white people, they're middle class, of course, they have a lot of money. And if you have a lot of money, you have a lot of properties. But if you have a lot of properties, but you don't have a lot of people in your place, then it leaves you with empty properties. I'm talking about buildings in Harlem. So there were lots of buildings in Harlem, there were lots of neighbors in Harlem, but there weren't really many people. Which is why the African Americans found it a perfect time to migrate. During the Great Migration, the newcomers started building homes, raising families, and finding jobs. This didn't sit right with the locals because they only had to compete amongst themselves before the blacks moved in. Now they have more competitors, not to mention the racial prejudice that was still lurking around. So it doesn't mean that Harlem was in the North, that Harlem also fought for black people's freedom. Still, these people were still not comfortable with with black people. They still, especially from the young people to the old people, there were only a few people that saw them as humans. Most of them saw them as pests. Most of them saw them as not human, something below human, but something that's also above dogs. If you're going to put yourselves in the shoes of a white family, of course, like let's say there are only 50,000 people living in the entire city of Baguio. Let's say we're part of the 50,000 people who are living in Baguio. We have our jobs, we have our families, and we're living okay. Right? We're living good. But then there are people in Manila who need to migrate to Baguio. Right? And as you know, some people here in Baguio, based on my experience, have some sort of prejudice against the people in Manila. Right? I'm not going to mention the specifics, but I'm just going to, let's just say that there is, and let's just say that there's a lot. Right? But based on my experience, there's a little bit. Right? Let's say the people, 10,000 people from Manila need to migrate to here in Baguio City, and let's say us as people who are working, we need to find jobs for ourselves. All right, but we can't find it. You know why? Because someone from Manila already got our job. Someone from Manila already got that position, so we can't get it. So we move to another company. But then that company says, we're sorry, somebody from Manila already has that position you're looking for. So of course, me as someone who lives in Baguio, someone who was here first, I would feel mad. I would feel some sort of hate towards these people from Manila. Alright? But if you put yourself in the shoes of the people from Manila, of course, like their homes, just got they can't live in Manila anymore. I can't come up with a reason why. But like, let's say they can't live in Manila anymore because it's dangerous for them. Right? For those 10,000 people, and they have no other choice but to come up here to Baguio and find jobs for just so they could support their families. Alright, so the people in Harlem, the white people in Harlem, and then the black people from the south, of course, have some misunderstandings. Of course, there's like a bit of a misplacement. It's like two puzzles that cannot match. So that's what was going on when the black people from the south migrated to Harlem. Moving on to part 3, the Harlem Renaissance. Here I'm going to be talking about what triggered the Harlem Renaissance and what caused it, what caused people to have a poetic outbreak, to have some sort of awakening, revolution, something like that. The migrators still encountered social challenges, similar but not as violent and tyrannic as it was in the South. However, the difference was that this time they found a way to fight back. The social challenges, the racial prejudice, the economic competition against the blacks were all mitigated by what is also referred to as the New Negro Movement. Okay, so since, as I said about the last slide, the blacks and the whites at the time were like mismatched puzzles, with the whites were more aggressive towards the black people because they're the majority, right? The black people are just the blacks are just the ones, they're just moving in, they're supposed to be just guests, just visitors. And these people, the white people, are supposed to be hosts. There was this thing called lynching. One of the things that triggered the Harlem Renaissance was lynching. To get you guys an interesting story, to get you guys a good understanding on lynching, I'm going to be telling you a story about Emmett Till. Alright, so Emmett Till, this didn't happen in Harlem, by the way, but as I said, things like, but I'm saying this because the thing that happened, what happened to Emmett Till happened to many people in Harlem. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who was visiting his family, his relatives in Mississippi. Now, this time there was still racial prejudice and there was like a lot of lynching for black people. But as you know, Emmett Till, he's 14 years old. People make mistakes at this age. I made a lot of mistakes in this age. I'm pretty sure everybody watching this video had made a lot of mistakes when they were 14. So yeah, Emmett Till, him and his cousins were outside of a grocery store. I assume they bought something to drink and they were drinking it by their car outside of the store. Anyways, a beautiful white woman, let's say, a beautiful white woman walks out of the grocery store, and Emmett Till, um, I'm not sure what he does, but maybe he whistled, like something like that, or maybe he whistled, maybe he said a punchline, or maybe he catcalled on this woman. Alright, I'm not sure exactly what he did. But what the woman said was he made her feel uncomfortable, and what the report said was that Emmett Till was flirting with this beautiful woman, or catcalling, let's just say. And that was the big mistake that he made. That was the biggest mistake that he made in his life. Because while Emmett Till finished his drink with his cousins and went home to his relatives and ate dinner, the woman went home to her family and told them about this black boy, what he did about Emmett Till, about how he made her feel uncomfortable. This infuriated the white woman's family, and they started to look for Emmett Till. Alright? Basically what happened was they tracked him down, they found him, they kidnapped him, and they couldn't find Emmett Till for a long time. Alright? For weeks, I would say. They couldn't find his body for weeks. Eventually they found his body, and they found a dead body. Eventually they found a dead body by a river, by a creek, by some running water. And when they looked at this boy's face, they could not recognize him. They could not recognize his face anymore. It was all puffed up. It was all bruised up. It was like it's like he was swelling. He was swelling. His face was swelling a lot. He had bruises on his body, and he was lifeless. Right. They knew right then and there that it was Emmett Till, and eventually his funeral was settled, was arranged, and to fight back, what his mother did was he didn't hide the face because it was so unrecognizable. It was so pitiful. Some people, if they see it, they might puke. But she didn't want to hide it. She didn't want to hide his face. She didn't want to hide his body. What she did was they allowed the press to come in. They allowed the news photographers to come in and take pictures of Emmett Till's dead body right in front of his dead mother. So this was a way of fighting back, and this was a way of infuriating the black community in Mississippi. So yeah, that's what I mean by lynching. That was the story of Emmett Till. If you want to see Emmett Till's dead body in his coffin, you can just search it up. You'll see it. But if you don't like graphic images, then I suggest you don't. Anyways, what happened here? What happened in Emmett Till's story is something very similar to the Harlem Renaissance. Basically, lynching. Right? What happened to Emmett Till was basically another example, one example of lynching. It's basically killing somebody and displaying their body in public in order to scare his community or the dead person's community. Right? So there was a lot of that happening. There were black people being hanged in public, and black people's dead bodies were being displayed in Harlem. And just like in Emmett Till's story, the black people found a way to fight back. So now that you understand what lynching is, and you know how cruel it is, and how difficult it still was for African Americans to live, even now that they're not slaves anymore, even now that they have a bit more rights, it was still obvious that they were still lacking rights. They were still being treated as unequals, and there was still a lot of persecution. Now, now the Black Americans had more. Not that the Black Americans had more freedom, they they decided to use it. They decided to use it against these lynchings, against these persecutions, against all this cruelty. So one of their biggest weapons, one of their biggest ways of fighting back, one of their biggest strengths were poetry, arts, poetry, literacy, literature, theater, music, and fashion. So they use this. They use these to fight the persecutions. But how do they do it? How do they use these things against killings, against lynchings? Well, there were already lots of black people that were talented on all these features, especially making music and writing stories. So society, they started to make their mark on society. Back then, they didn't have a voice. Back then, the black people didn't have a voice. As slaves, you had no right to say anything. You had no right to complain. You could not write. But now they could. Now they had a voice. Now they had ways of expressing themselves, of expressing how they felt. Because back then, they couldn't do anything about it. And now they could. They started to have a voice, and they started to have their own culture. And because of this culture, Harlem started to feel like a black neighborhood, like a black city, like a place for black people. It started to not feel white anymore. Because of the rise of poetry, because of the rise of their arts, because of the blooming and the blossoming of their talents. And because of these, the streets started to fill up with these songs. Everywhere you would go, you would hear songs made by black people. Every library you would go, you would see books written by black people. And every store you would go to, every thrift shop, every wagwagan you would go to, would be clothes that would be initially worn by also black people. Black fashion, black everything. It did not feel like a white neighborhood anymore. So, what happened after that? The white people started to move out. The white people of Harlem started to move out of Harlem, and little by little, Harlem was just all black people. And that was left up to their freedom. They pushed the white people away by making them feel unwelcome. They pushed the white people away because of their culture. They filled Harlem with their culture, with so much of their culture that the white people did not feel like they didn't threaten the white people, but it just exposed, because of their voice, they just exposed how they were feeling, how they were being treated, and how they were being their white counterparts were playing against humanity. So this urged the white people to move out of Harlem and find greener pastures somewhere else. One piece that I did derive from the Harlem Renaissance was Black No More, written by George S. Schuyler. Basically, Black No More is Black No More. Here is Black No More summarized. On New Year's Eve in 1993, Max Disher and his friend Bunny Brown go to the popular Honky Tonk Club in New York City. Max tries to ask a beautiful blonde girl from Atlanta to dance, but she cruelly rebuffs him because he is black. The next day, Bunny tells him about an old friend of theirs, Dr. Cookman, who has discovered a treatment to turn black Americans white. The treatment, called Black No More, changes a black person's skin, hair, and features in 3 days to make them indistinguishable from the white people, though it will not change the features of any babies the person might have. So The biggest part, the most significant part of this is the treatment. Basically, in this world, um, somebody found a way to turn black people into white people, a black person into a white person, right? And they cannot tell the difference. The voice, the hair, the skin, everything. So throughout the story, as the story moves on, as the main character turns himself into, is turned into a white person and start living a white person's life, he discovers that it's a bit dull. It's not the same. He does not belong in that world. He starts to regret being a white person, and the rest is history. So this was one of the most popular stories in during the Harlem Renaissance. So of course, when white people would read these, of course they would not, and everybody in Harlem would say they like this story, and a white person would read it and it's against them. Of course, a white person would feel unwelcome in that city, would feel like it's not like he or she is an outsider, and then that's what pushed the white people to move out. There was lots more stories about this, that's just also kind of ridiculing white people, but in a more smarter way, in a less cruel way. But it's their way of fighting back. As you can see in this story, they did picture white people being cruel, but it's realistic. In here, in the Black No More, the blonde lady refused him rudely because he was black. If this was unrealistic, then it would be disrespectful. But it is realistic, so it is honest. And this was one of their ways of using their voice to fight against the persecution. Hence the Harlem Renaissance. Okay. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. I hope I was able to express it well. To this, I hope my discussion on the Harlem Renaissance was useful, was helpful, and was memorable. I hope you guys learned something from it. I hope you all have a better understanding about the Harlem Renaissance after watching this video. That's it for me. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your time, and see you next time.